Alrighty, everybody. Welcome back to See and Learn. We're going to get started with a quick video, so grab your seats, grab your drinks, and we'll be back up in just a moment. How's everybody doing tonight? Doing pretty good? All right, welcome to everybody that is here and watching online. It seems like we do have a little bit more of an intimate night here, a little bit more of a smaller group, but what better of a topic to have than flowers on an intimate night, right? So real quick, we're just going to thank some of the sponsors and the people that make this possible. So Carib Trans, as always, is sponsoring the live stream for all of you folks watching at home or later. We've got Hibiscus Cottage that is sponsoring our speaker for the night. So big thanks. Yeah, huge round of applause for Hibiscus. We have, of course, the Prince Bernhard Culture Funds and public entity Seba. They help us out every single year. So huge round of applause for those guys. And all of our sponsors on the island. These are just some of them. We have tons of people that make this possible every single year. So definitely big round of applause for everybody that is out here. And for you guys for coming out and supporting us. Awesome. So raffle tickets. I think a lot of you know what some of the prizes are. So I'll just go through them real quick. We have a blue throw and indigo throw, some handmade jewelry, lots of different cottages are giving us some nice stays, signed books, homemade Sabin beauty products, some guided hikes, a knife, a 8-day, 7-night live-aboard adventure. So lots and lots of really good stuff that's in those raffle prizes. See Lynn or Emily for all of your raffle needs. We'll be doing the drawing on the very last night, closing night, which is the 27th. All right, so if you guys are in town, make sure you don't miss that, but you can still win even if you're not here. All right. Now, some upcoming events that we have going forward. Tomorrow morning, you can get up early with me and Mike and go on an orchid hike. So we'll actually be seeing a lot of these flowers in person. And that is going to be at the Spring Bay Trail. So we're all going to meet at Seba and then walk over together. Tomorrow afternoon, if the water is more your thing, we do have a Moe Reef and Sea Urchin dive with Alwyn. So he's going to be taking you guys to one of those places and showing you where they do all of the research and put in those habitats. So pretty cool. And then our next seminar is at Long Haul 2 days from now. We'll be talking about lobsters for the most part. So definitely don't miss out on that. But for tonight, we have Mike Bechtold. So if you've heard Seba called the Unspoiled Queen, then you have Dr. Mike Bechtold to thank for his monumental contribution to conservation on the island. His work as the orchid guy to survey and protect the orchids keeps Saba looking beautiful and pristine. Being a part of the American Orchid Society for over 20 years, Bechtold has spent countless hours in the field identifying orchids. A biologist by education and a quick study, he has worked with the Seba Conservation Foundation to set up a local weather station and even worked on projects with the University of Puerto Rico. Mike has been a presenter at See and Learn before, many, many times, so let's welcome back the orchid aficionado himself, Mike Bechtold.
Wow, first of all, I'm not a doctor. And I should have caught that myself. I can't tell you enough how happy I am to be back on Seba, especially to see so many familiar faces. It's been 7 years since I've been back to Seba. This will be a great opportunity to kind of catch up on all the orchid activity that's taken place over the years. The topic for tonight is just an overview on Seba's orchids. Here's our agenda. I kind of asked the organizers what kind of things would people on Seba, whether they're local or not local, what would you want to know about the orchids on Seba? And I'm clicking too many times. So the first thing we're going to talk about is what makes an orchid and why is it distinct from other flowers and plants. Then we're going to talk about all the activity that's been done so far to catalog orchid species for Seba. And then we'll talk about the population study that took place on a particular orchid species. Glenn Holmes asked me, so come on, Mike, tell us how we compare with other islands. And I've got a chart that shows how Seba stacks up with other similar islands as far as numbers of orchid species by area. And then once we've gone through all of that, I'll give you an idea of where you can find the orchids that have been identified for Seba. This is a very sensitive device. And then if we have time, we'll kind of wrap up with how you can better grow orchids in your own garden here on Seba or anywhere else that you may be. So first, what makes an orchid? I passed around some flowers that were on your chairs, and I see they've been migrating just a little bit. What I wanted to do with that is to be able to, so you could get up close to that. It's one thing to see it on a slide. It's another thing to kind of hold it in your hands. These are silk phalaenopsis flowers, and the first thing, I'll keep my finger away from that. First thing is the orchid flower parts come in threes. You have three sepals on the outside. You can see that on your orchid flower, and then three petals on the inside. One of the petals has been modified into a lip, and you can see on the orchid that you have in your hand and the one here on the slide it's the bottom petal. Now that petal is actually a landing pad for potential pollinators. And every orchid species has a different kind of lip depending on how it's trying to attract a pollinator, whether it's trying to mimic some kind of a wasp or some kind of a bee or simply, a lot of times the white flowers is like a landing pad for night flying hawk moths to be able to find the flower in the dark. This flower is here on Seba. This is called Brassivola cucullata, and so I wanted to use one of your orchids as an example of what makes an orchid an orchid. One of the main things, and you'll see it in the orchid you have in your hands, is the male and female parts have been fused into a single column, and that's that little beak-like thing that you see poking out from the middle of the flower. That holds pollen, and so unlike other flowers that have stamens and a pistil, and there's just pollen flying everywhere, orchids have decided to keep their pollen in tight little packets, and they hold it underneath the beak of the orchid, and then when a pollinator lands, it uses the lip to guide the insect into the column, and through a biochemical reaction, as soon as that bee or a wasp or a fly makes contact with the pollen attaches. The insect doesn't even know it. He's just going about their business, trying to find nectar or something that this flower is promised, and most orchids don't deliver. Whether it's nectar, they'll have a night fragrance, but there will be nothing else for their trouble. So once the insect has that pollen attached to the back, the whole idea of their reproductive strategy is for that insect then to go to another flower and then unload that pollen in the next flower. And that's how you get good cross-fertilization in order to have a good, robust genetics. But because of that, the orchid has really hitched its wagon to that very specific strategy, right? One pollinator to an orchid. Sometimes it's a euglossine bee. Sometimes here on Seba, it's the hawk moth that flies at night and goes to look for cucullata flowers. So that's a risky strategy to hinge everything on your pollinator, because what happens if your pollinator's not around? Well, orchids can still grow by sending out new leads, but they're not going to create more seed to have the next generation. And then once the flower is pollinated and the seed pod develops, the seed pod is just like thousands and thousands of seeds, sometimes 10,000 seeds in a seed pod. And this is where the strategy of an orchid really gets interesting. It really wants its seed to spread as far as possible, so it makes its seed as light as possible, so there's no endosperm. And if you know about seeds, the endosperm is like the food packet that goes along with a seed. Orchids don't have that. To make it as light as possible, to send it as far as possible. So think about this risky strategy. Specific pollinator, seeds with no lunchbox. So the whole strategy is to create thousands and thousands of these seeds, knowing and accepting the fact that only a small percentage of them are going to find a suitable place to land and develop. It gets even better. The only way that this embryonic seed can develop is if it finds a mycorrhizal fungus, which is also a very specific thing. So the embryonic seed establishes a relationship with the fungus, and that's the only way that the embryo gets its energy to develop into an orchid. And so as the orchid grows, it depends less on the mycorrhizal fungus and more on its own roots to get more nutrients. So it's an interesting thing for orchids to have such a risky strategy, but you'll see in another slide, they're almost everywhere in the world. Any questions about orchid flowers and the reproductive strategy?
I have one.
Yes.
Is only the one insect has, will the second insect be able to come and get the pollen?
Yeah, the question is, if one pollinator comes, is there any pollen left for another? Yes, the answer is yes. Generally, there are two pollen packets in the column of an orchid.
What's the time frame of how often they reproduce that?
No,
That night, is it still?
it's gone. Well, yeah, so once they're gone, the flower is done, and it'll hold itself waiting for another pollinator to bring a packet to it. Once the pollen's gone, now the stigma is open to receive pollen, and if it does, then the pollen sperm will go down the ovary and will start, and I'll show you a seed pod here soon to give you an example of what a flower looks like when it's developing seed. Does that answer your question? Okay.
One more question.
Yes, sir.
So the mycorrhizal fungi, they're not providing energy. Are they right?
They're providing some carbohydrate.
They are. Okay.
Yes, they are.
Can you repeat the question?
I'm sorry. Does the mycorrhizal fungus provide energy to the orchid? Was that your question?
Yeah, that's because it's different from how mycorrhizae usually work with plants, right? They're usually getting energy from the plant as a symbiosis.
Yeah, it's the opposite. And in this case, the mycorrhizal fungus, there's like hyphae that are between the roots, the developing plant, and the mycorrhizal fungus. I mean, the microscopic view of that is very intriguing.
Wow, thank you.
Yeah, you bet. 25,000 species of orchids in the world, and the only place you cannot find an orchid is Antarctica. Think of that. In the Arctic, in Kodiak, Alaska, they have orchids. So they're one of the most highly evolved plants on the planet. So the ones you pick up in the store are generally subtropical or tropical, and, anywhere from 0 to 700 meters. So that's about the sweet spot for growing something in your house. How do orchids grow? They basically 3 different ways. One, they grow on a tree, so that's epiphytically, and this is Epiderm Anceps that you'll see on Bud's Mountain. Oh gosh, sorry. That you'll see on Bud's Mountain. It attaches to trees and just grows on and on. In fact, I saw this picture is probably 7 or 8 years old. I saw this plant today, and it's almost 3 times as many growths on the tree. It's phenomenal to see. Or orchids can grow on rocks lithophytically. And then this is a picture of Polystachya concreta that from over a sandy cruise. And then otherwise it will grow as a terrestrial. This is an example that you see here on Seba called Spathoglotis plicata. Most of the time you see this in people's gardens, but it was a good example of a terrestrial to help resonate with you. Questions? Okay, moving on. We're going to talk now about all of the efforts that have been taken to catalog orchid species for Seba over the years. And so starting with Richard Howard in 1974, he identified 10 species for Seba. Many of you may remember Stuart Chipka from his days on the island. He did a lot of work on orchids here on Seba. He took Howard's initial work from 1974 and set about trying to confirm all those 10 orchids on Seba. He did some publishing in Selbiana and the Plinia magazine. I brought a lot of that material with me that's underneath Kai Wolf's chair right now. But then probably his biggest achievement was the trail guide that he produced on a limited basis, the trail guide of orchids on Seba. The only thing about the trail guide is we were limited kind of to the lower half of the island, so it just didn't have the benefit of the 2011, 2012 work that was done to help kind of flesh it out. And we'll talk about that in a second. Some of you may remember Michiel, who was here on Seba for a while. Between 2011 and 2012, he really made a big contribution to finding and helping identify new orchids on Seba. In fact, he did such a great job that you see to the right of that, University of Puerto Rico professors Ackerman and Tremblay came to Seba after working with Kai, Paul Hedges, and others in order to try to document and get voucher material for all of the new plants and some of the ones that we knew about but had yet. See, the only way you get credit for an orchid on any island or any place is a voucher specimen that's sent to, a place that's authorized to validate these things. So it's not me knowing in 2004 that we had one. It's not enough. It has to be vouchered. And so in 2012, keep this in mind, that the work to get all of the the new orchid species, took place in late 2012 and 2013. To the right, you see Feldman's Orchid Checklist of the Lesser Antilles. That's the last authoritative guide of the orchid species for our islands, the Lesser Antilles. But Feldman published in March of 2012. So he didn't have the benefit of all of the research that was done with Michiel and the University of Puerto Rico from late 2012 and forward into 2013, sometimes part of early 14. So keep that in mind as we go. In 2014, Michiel, working with the Dutch Orchidine magazine, wrote a Seba special. And it was, so if any of you have seen Stewart's Trail Guide, it kind of gives you pictures of what he saw and where they might be. Michiel's does an awesome job of giving you a picture and then talking about, and we'll see it in subsequent slides, where it would be, when does it flower, that kind of thing. It's awesome. The great thing about it is the archives for the Orchidine magazines, that special is available by PDF. You can just download it. And I printed out a copy of it. It's in Dutch, but I ran it through a Google translator, and it did an okay job of getting it to a semblance of English. The only place it didn't do a good job is in the tables. And then Frank Axelrod came to Seba in 2021, and he's recently published a guide for all the plant material on Seba. And Kai has a copy of that as well. That was just published in October.
I think he was here in 2019. Maybe he just published it.
He was here in, yes, his last visit was, yeah. Yeah, his last visit was 2019. He came here between 2013 and 2019, but then, you got to find a publisher.
It was published in 2000.
Published in 2021, yeah. And then this is that table I was talking to you about. It's in Dutch, mostly because the blooming period gets messed up when you do the Google Translator for English. But what I love about it is everything that is in bold is what he observed. And for the most part, we have voucher material for. But then he went on to look at all of the literature to make sure that he had a one-stop shopping guide for either what he saw or was validated for Seba. So at the end of the day, he has 25 orchids attributed to Seba. Not all of them have been vouchered, but a great start. So we're done talking now about all the cataloging of species, and we're moving on to a population study. Yes?
So before you move on,
Sure.
because you say there's 32 species,
Yeah,
so,
I can explain that.
okay, is that time?
No, I should explain it now.
So that culmination of everybody's work, and how many of those are, I guess at this point in the planet, you can't say they're really endemic, but these aren't species found in people's gardens because they imported them, but actually found in the wild?
Yes,
That's a little-
every one of these is a species that is not endemic to Seba. Let me just start by saying there are no endemic orchids for Seba. Endemic meaning, come on. Oh, all right. Endemic meaning that it's only found on Seba. You will see in Feldman's paper that there's 3 islands, Montserrat being one of them, that has an endemic epidendrum, but Seba does not. So they're native. They hadn't been seen before, but they're here. Does that help explain that?
Yeah.
Now, the reconciliation on the numbers, where did I get 32 from? I take Michiel's 25 that Feldman never got a chance to see. And then I did a side-by-side comparison between Feldman's 2012 document and Michiel's 24 guide. 2014 guide. And I end up with 7 orchids that Feldman absolutely says are here on Seba. And so I simply added them to Michiel's 25 to give us 32.
And is that more about being able to look at things year-round and finding them, as opposed to trying to go out there now, you're not going to find 32, but if you live here year-round, you can really look at them?
Yeah, if you lived here year-round, you would definitely, well, maybe not definitely, you'd be able to see them better if you knew where to look.
Right. Live year-round and hike from
Yeah.
top to bottom.
Yeah, many of these orchids are very short-lived, meaning they'll send up a single spike flower, bloom, and then it will die. And then they'll send up leaves. And then by summer, the leaves die back to like a tuber that's underground, and then you won't see them until they do it again. So having Michiel here, 2011 and 12, really contributed to being able to have a persistent kind of stare at the right places to find the orchids for Seba. Moving on to the Cucullata study. Beginning in 2009, University of Puerto Rico, teaming up with Hannah Madden over on St. Eustatia in Stenapa, started doing a study of Brassivola cucullata with these 2 ideas in mind. These are small populations of orchids on small islands. How do they survive in the long run? So first, let's talk about whether or not these populations are even stable. And then second, which life stage is most critical, and so that we can then think about strategies to preserve the native orchids for Seba. And so in 2020, the article was published, Small Populations on Small Islands, What Chance Does an Orchid Have? And Dr. Ackerman always does a great job of having catchy titles, right? And here's the way it went. So Seba's orchids, our cucullatas, they had started the survey for about 1.5 years before we found out about it. And so myself, Michiel Buchan, working with SCF and Kai, we teamed up with the survey, and it really turned out to be a great marriage, if I can put it that way. Eustatia has a relatively homogeneous cucullata population, same elevation, same trees, but where Seba, we have a variety. We were on trees, on rocks, dead trees, young trees, live trees. So between the 2 of us small islands, we had some pretty powerful data to analyze. So the 2020 conclusions, it's a mixed bag. First, the long-term trend is bleak, meaning small populations on small islands. That's a recipe for disaster. And seedling survival rate is low, and there's a couple of reasons for that. There's been a trend in the Caribbean of drying and warming, right? And so it's tough for a seedling to make it when you think about the reproductive strategy to begin with, right? Find mycorrhizal fungus, get associated with it, enough water, enough sun. I mean, it's tough to be an orchid. Through the study, they found that the optimal size of a plant is anywhere from 7 to 20 leaves, because those plants have the best chance of growing on rather than dying. And so that left Dr. Ackerman kind of thinking about, well, how are these orchids surviving? And they've come up with this idea of a spasmodic recruitment. And when you think about that, I think what that really means is when the times are good, they're prolific, but when they're not, they try to just struggle through. But again, because of the trend of drying and warming, the chances of young plants surviving, plus the damage to their habitat, the disturbances. Like for our cucullata study, we found that anything that was below 5 feet was likely going to get munched on. Yeah. So
how seasonal are they? So if we have a bad drought and that upsets their normal cycle, they're gonna die off completely, or their seeds are protected somehow, or
Yeah.
what happens?
so just to restate the question, so in a bad year, how do they make it? First of all, the youngsters are probably not going to make it, but the older plants, the energy stored in each of those leaves helps them bridge the gap from one bad year to another. So they'll kind of draw down the energy from the leaf and even still try to grow. And by the time they get to 7 to 20 leaves, they have an extensive root system all over the tree. And because of that, they're able to do a fairly efficient job of picking up whatever moisture might come. So even mists that come through is enough to help kind of keep them going. It's the youngsters that end up with difficulty because their root system just isn't large enough to
So if the
cope.
plant is 7 to 20 leaves, you can sort of gauge its age?
That's not easy. I would any given clump of Brassavola cucullata could send out like 3 to 6 new leads because they grow in multiple directions. One lead would generally put out 1 growth a year. Depends. If it's a good year, they may go 2. So it's tough to nail that
It's
down.
more of a gauge of nice rains. So this year we're having nice rains. So it's not a sign of age, but a sign of prosperity
Right.
relative to rainfall.
Yeah. Okay. Questions about the study? Right.
Too much rain for orchids?
Because they're growing on trees and rocks, I don't think too much is part of the equation because it just drains off. Orchids in pots on your porch is another story because orchids need oxygen around their roots in order to survive. If they sit in water or if they sit in dense soil, the roots will die off and the plant will start sending roots probably over the pot, trying to find some place to go. Yes,
Question?
yes.
7 to 20. So if it has significantly more than 20, does that mean it's not as likely to survive?
Oh no, it's the opposite. If it has more than 20, it's gonna go gangbusters.
So why say 7 to 20?
From a statistical standpoint, they found that was the optimal size. That anything smaller than that would likely not survive.
But larger than that would.
That size and larger would. Yes, sir. Okay. So where are those cucullatas that we were studying on Seba? You'll see them. They were out on Old Booby Hill. Now look at that. How would you like to live there? Right? I mean, the great thing is there's a lot of mist coming in from the ocean. Whether they're growing on trees, you would probably find them here on this tree, or in the rock crevices. They generally will survive in a place that gives them a little bit of shelter from drying out. So on Old Booby Hill, also a Spring Bay. Look at that. You'll find orchids growing on some of the boulders along this ridge, but then most of the rest of the cucullata is up here. And the other place you find them is on Dancing Place Trail, and I didn't have a picture of that. But I went to Dancing Place Trail today, and the main tree that had a lot of cucullata on it has fallen over the pathway. But the cucullata is still growing just fine. And on a dead tree, there's a big cucullata with a flower right now. So,
By the way, I walked that today.
yeah,
That's not a new tree fall. That's been
Yeah.
that way for a long time.
which is a testament to their survival. This is the Video Saba Conservation Foundation doing measuring and numbering of Brassavola cucullata. It's a survey of the cucullata population extended from St. Eustatia to Seba. First thing we do is determine the number of plants that will be recorded. Next, we determine the number of growths in each plant.
This is 58, this bunch.
58. Seba is one of the few places that I see double flowers on cucullata. So you can see that this is one of the most mature plants that you'll find on Seba, but look, it's growing on a dead tree. So, and I know that this particular plant, the tree fell over back in 2014, and it's no longer with us.
Wasn't there a huge big one on the corner of Bechtold as well?
Yes.
After that.
Yeah, I was wondering about that. I was looking because it had ciliary in it, and it's gone now. Yeah. Yeah, I have 2 more videos on how we conducted the study. Once the count of the plant growths are done, we create the labels using the Dymo, red plastic Dymo labels. We punch a hole and then insert thread and then tie it around the plant. There's James in the background. You're doing this out in the middle of a big rock field. And we're going to move on. So now he's simply attaching, you know, the markers and labels, especially for plants that had, see, there's a seed pod right there. So this is the flower that's died, and then the ovary then extends into the seed pod itself. So that's a cucullata seed pod. So he would be labeling that, so we would come back the next time to see whether or not the seed pod bursted open and distributed its seed. Okay, the next question, how does Seba's orchids stack up to other islands? So I went back to Feldman's paper, and thankfully he had all the Lesser Antilles islands and an orchid species count for each one. So all I did was add the square miles for each of the islands and came up with this chart showing Seba as a 5 square mile island with 32 orchid species. So, and then looking at the rest of them, how do you feel about Seba's orchids? Pretty darn good, right? Right. Now, Truth in Lending, Feldman has assigned a number of 18 for both Seba and Statia. But remember, he didn't have the benefit of our new discoveries when he published his paper. So I'm holding to 32, and I contacted Hannah about the 18 number, and she wrote me back that she felt comfortable with the number 11. So that's what we have. So Seba should feel pretty good about the orchid species that they have. Or now we're going to try to quickly go through. So now we've talked about what's an orchid, how many species do you have, the studies that have been conducted. Come on, Mike, tell us where can we go to find an orchid. What I did was I divided the island in half, right around windward side and slightly above windward side. And then I listed all 32 orchids above and below that middle line. In yellow, a few weeks ago, were all the orchids that I thought that we could go look at today. But having been now up to Mount Scenery, Bud's Mountain, Spring Bay, there are some that I wouldn't be able to find today. But so let's take a look at what we can see. So we're going to start at the lowest part of the island. This is Cychillus Corelli. You look at the picture, it is right on the ocean cliff on Old Booby Hill. They live there. They love it there. And exactly. And it's not a place that you want to go. This required like a 3-point hold, hand, feet, and then a hand on the camera to get around the cliff in order to get a picture of this thing. It's very precarious. And then there's 200 feet, down from there. But it's a beautiful plant. The thing about Corelli is when they were talking about changing the Fort Bay, there was a population of Corelli just above Fort Bay. And so that we were concerned that maybe with the improvements that were going to be made, we would lose the species for the island. Long story short, we found a bunch of them out on Old Booby Hill, and I did kind of a run from Old Booby Hill, and basically there's a band of Corelli from Old Booby Hill all the way around to Fort Bay, here and there. Not a lot on boulders where it could find its conditions. Moving up just a little bit higher, because you'll find Cuculata nearby Corelli, but also all the way up then to about the midpoint on Spring Bay. I even found a Cuculata over on the north coast, all too far trail, which was odd to find, but interesting. Probably the most prevalent orchid on Seba is ciliary, often called the lady's lash here on Seba. They grow on rocks and trees, so keep an eye out for that. And then here's a picture of the commingling of ciliary and brassivola with a seed pod. One of the enigmas on Seba is Nocturnum. It's an epidendrum that is absolutely valid for Seba, but since 1974, no one's really seen it. Stuart Chipka reported it, said he had seen them, but we haven't been able to find anybody to kind of show it to us. And Stuart, before he died, didn't give me a chance to, I didn't get a chance to see it. So I went into Stuart's notebook and I found some GPS coordinates. So I'm hoping to go out and double check these GPS coordinates, even though they're 17 years old, to see if maybe we can finally see it. Oesiclatus maculata. This is one of the examples of how that reproductive strategy for orchids really is amazing. This species comes from Africa. And now it could have island hopped, or it could have simply come over in a hurricane from the coast of Africa. Moving up now to still Spring Bay, probably in the grassy areas just below the boulder field. Saccoila Lanciolata. I couldn't see this on Spring Bay, but in the spring, you would see it mostly by seeing this flower spike, and that would trigger you to look a little closer. So maybe next spring, if you're going down Spring Bay, maybe you'll see them around April or so. And then intermingled with Lanciolata is this orchid. It ends up, it's just a little bit, it's not bright green, it's more of a grayish green, and then you see the flower there. These are the new identities that Michiel found. And then we've corrected some identifications. The literature from Howard said that Seba has Epidendrum secundum. So when we found this on Seba, we said, oh, it must be secundum, until Dr. Ackerman said, oh no, it's radicans. So it's great to have that relationship with UPR. And then another one, literature said foliosa. So this plant out on Sandy Cruz, we said, Eureka, we found it. Well, no, you have concreta. So it's nice to have that clarification. Now we're moving up to the upper part of the island, and we're almost there. So again, the mist line right around windward side, a little higher than windward side. One of the first ones you'll see, and we saw a picture of it just back here, although yours was in Sandy Cruz, Epiderm Anceps. This plant is the one I was talking about that's on Bud's Mountain Trail on the left-hand side. It's about 3 times this size now. It's really looking good. And then this is an example of how hard it is to find an orchid amongst all that greenness. Do you see the orchid? There it is. I mean, this was the challenge, trying to figure out how to find, let alone identify, orchids on Seba. This one, we had a presumptive identification of diform because that's what the literature told us. Well, we found out, working with Dr. Ackerman, that it's actually Mutilianum, which is another new species for Seba. Moving now just below Mount Scenery and the tower, just before you take that last bunch of stairs, is Ornithidium Coxinium. Now, if you looked at that and didn't notice the orange flower, you would probably walk right by it, right? Around here, they call this the flame orchid. Kai says that there is one still up on Mount Scenery. When I was up there today, I didn't quite see it. Pardon?
It's not blooming.
Oh, yeah. And now a couple of terrestrials, again, that if I didn't put the arrow in, you'd say, where is the orchid? Microchilus plantagineus. Just a world of leaves coming up. It's already bloomed. And then Pontieva petiolata. Now this one we have a flower spike, and then some of the leaves. And now, so we're done with Mount Scenery. So what other orchids might you see around Seba, maybe around Windward Side? And so many of you probably have seen this one already. This is Vanda Misoakim. When I walked around Windward Side, the place that I would normally see them near the church has been gone from the wall. But Glenn not only has this Vanda, but he also has Arachnus, and they're all in full bloom right now down by Juliana's. Okay, so we've talked about what makes an orchid. We've talked about the cataloging of species, talked about the population study, we talked about where they are. Now, as a wrap-up, I'm happy to answer questions. Not only about the presentation, but this is also the time to help discuss questions about growing orchids. And I'm here all week and after the presentation. Yes, Lynn?
I have a general question. So if somebody's not an orchid lover, how about a general question of why should we care? You know, are they a telltale species? Do you just need to care that you're not losing pollinators, or just because they're beautiful? Can you?
Well, that's a really good question. Why should we care about orchids? Back in 2007, 2008, orchids were designated as a sentinel species, among others, for the Caribbean. And so that was part of the impetus for the cucullata population study, was to kind of get a baseline of orchids in the Caribbean. And so we should care about them because as orchids go, so may other things that you care about. Sir?
Any tips on identifying orchids when they're not in bloom, either simply as that's an orchid, or perhaps more specifically what genus?
Yeah, so if you're out there walking around and you see something that may be an orchid, how do you know if it's an orchid or not, if it's not in bloom? A couple of ways that I would recommend. First is to look for those kind of roots, thick roots that will emanate from the base of the plant. If it's so, there are some grasses on Seba that look just like Epiderm Anceps, and they grow on trees. I looked at one today. I had to get down close enough to feel the leaf and then look at the roots, and it's, oh, no, you're just a grass. But otherwise, experience is the way. So you see it in flower, then you'll know it forever. Sir?
So you said the one of the species you had was origin in Africa.
Yeah.
And, like, you think that's a natural range expansion and not an accidental introduction?
Definitely not an accidental introduction. Oesiclades is considered an invasive species. But the interesting thing is, in the places that I saw lots of Oesiclades in previous years, I didn't see them this year. But Spring Bay, we'll see a few while we're down there. So it either island hopped or came over in a hurricane. No, it's legitimately here based on natural reasons, not introduced.
Over the hill, are they affected by salt water?
That's fascinating. So Cychillus should be a problem because of the salt water, but it seems to be just happy. We probably need to wrap up so we can enjoy this.
That might repeat the question.
Oh, repeat the question. I should have known that. So the orchids down on Old Booby Hill, they're so close to the ocean, doesn't the salt water adversely affect the plant and the roots? I felt the same way. I would sit on Old Booby Hill with the squalls coming over me, and I'm thinking, there's got to be some negative effect. But when I look at the roots of Corelli and Cuculata on Old Booby Hill, they're happy as a lark. I don't understand it. Questions? Yes.
You mentioned one orchid that came from Africa. Are most orchids here from different areas, or are they native?
So we talked about the orchid from Africa. Are the other orchids from Seba invasive, or how'd they get here? Generally speaking, it's over the trade winds. And with the seed as light as it is, orchids can island hop from the coast of South America through the trade winds from island to island to island.
I assume that means the mycorrhiza are fairly ubiquitous.
Fairly ubiquitous, although, I would see some plants and then on trees, and I'd see trees that look just like those trees. It's just a butterfly. And there would be no orchids on the other tree. So I agree, the mycorrhiza fungus, I believe, is ubiquitous, but the orchid seed has to be able to find it.
And are there many different species of the mycorrhiza, or is it? Is it?
Is there more than one species of mycorrhiza fungus? The answer is yes. Now,
And orchids don't really care.
there are preferences, but I think a mycorrhiza fungus will generally do, although I think there's probably some professors who might be, if Jim Ackerman is looking at me right now, he's shaking his finger.
Just as a general statement, all orchids or white orchids on table are protected by law. So they're not
So all the orchids on Seba, are they all protected? And the answer is absolutely yes. They're all protected under the CITES Convention. You can look, but you don't touch. Yes, sir.
So, you said you talked about the climate change and that maybe affecting some of the orchids here on the island. Do you have a general view of the future of the orchids on Seba?
So we talked about warming and drying trend, and so the question is, what do I think about the future of orchids on Seba? I can talk specifically to Cuculata. I have to say, because of spasmodic recruitment, that there is hope for this population, because I see as many Cuculatas on live trees as I see on dead trees that are going to fall over. And the ones on live trees have enough growths to make it. So it may be touch and go, and tomorrow on the field study, you'll see 7 years later we're going to look at 3 or 4 plants that, and it's a mixed bag. You'll have to come to Spring Bay to see it for yourself. it's an example of some doing better, some doing worse, and then the damage of their environment and its effect. Does that answer your question? Okay. Yes, ma'am.
Do you know how much damage has been caused by the goats to the actual orchid population?
Well, anything below 5 feet. Oh, so why do I keep forgetting that? The question is there any damage to the orchid population due to the goats? And so one thing for sure is where goats are, any orchid that is lower than 5 feet tall is not gonna make it. We had some that would make it like a year or two, and then it would be discovered, and then it's gone.
So with luck,
It's luck.
with luck, the culling of the goats should help those orchid populations.
That is a positive development, yes. With the culling of the goat population, that should help.
So under ideal conditions, how long will an orchid live?
Wow. An orchid can live, so under ideal conditions, how long can an orchid live, Mike? Thank you, Lynn. Forever. The answer is forever. As long as it's sending out new growths and sustaining itself through nutrition, life is good. It doesn't even need to reproduce itself or flower or seed or anything. It will just keep growing on until it runs out of space. Yes, ma'am.
What is the earliest historic record of a particular an orchid? When has anybody discovered something written
Yeah.
about orchids?
So when was the earliest time that anybody had published or discovered orchids? I would say way back, the 1500s or earlier. I'm thinking now about some orchids in Turkey that whose tubers were eaten like potatoes, and so they've been known back into antiquity. Just maybe not published, but people have known them and used them.
Nothing's been discovered on ancient Egyptian writing.
Has anything been discovered on ancient Egyptian writing? Not that I'm aware of. Anything else? Well, thanks very much for your kind attention.
Alrighty, everybody. One more big round of applause for Mike Bechtold and that awesome presentation. Now, I hope that you guys are staying for dinner at Brigadoon, alright? But let's have everybody give one big round of applause for Brigadoon for hosting this event tonight. Now, we do have to turn this presentation venue back into a restaurant, so if you guys could hit the bar or hang out outside just for a little bit so we can swap everything around, give us about 10 minutes, and then you can come back in to eat dinner. So, thank you guys very much, and have a good one.